Okay, let's unpack this. We are stepping back into the roaring 20s to a story that, even a century later, it still feels like the dark heart of Hollywood.
It really does.
I'm talking about the foundational crime of the movie industry. A murder so explosive, so tangled up in scandal and secrecy, and frankly, institutional rot, that it permanently changed the DNA of cinema.
You're absolutely right. This is the case where the victim was, in many ways, just as much a mystery as his killer.
So today we are doing a deep examination of the killing of director William Desmond Taylor.
And it's a perfect storm. It's early 20th century American ambition, deep-seated psychological secrecy, and just profound law enforcement incompetence.
It's unbelievable.
To truly get why this is one of America's great unsolved mysteries, you have to look past the silent film glamour. You have to see the corruption that was just running through the very foundations of Los Angeles, especially the people who were supposed to be pursuing justice.
So let's start where it all began, at the scene of the crime. We're talking about the morning of Thursday, February 2nd, 1922.
And the air in Los Angeles is unusually cold. It's hovering near freezing, which is rare for LA.
And that chill really sets a bleak stage for what's about to be discovered.
Precisely. At 7:30 in the morning, a man named Henry Peavy is arriving for work.
Peavy was Taylor's cook and valet, right?
I was, 37 years old, and he's heading to this modest but very respectable complex called the Alvarado Court Apartments, specifically Bungalow 404B South Alvarado Street, right near Westlake Park.
So Peavy unlocks the door, and he steps inside. Now, Taylor's bungalow, it was comfortable, but it wasn't, some flashy movie star mansion.
Not at all. And within seconds of that door closing, the morning quiet is just completely shattered.
What happens?
The sound is described as a high-pitched, guttural, panicked screaming. It's so loud it draws everyone out of their apartments.
And these weren't just any neighbors.
No, this is Hollywood. The neighbors were rising studio executives, well-known actors, actresses. They all come rushing in to find this just horrific sight.
William Desmond Taylor, one of the most powerful and respected directors in the entire industry, is dead.
He's lying face up in his living room, fully dressed, in a pool of blood. The state of the body, the scene. It suggested he'd been lying there since late the previous evening.
And the shock of this discovery, it just launches what was instantly recognized across the entire country as Hollywood's first great crime.
Oh, instantly. It exposed everything. The town's drinking during Prohibition, the rampant drug use, the dangerous, hidden emotional lives of its biggest stars. It was a mystery that, more than 100 years later, still casts this massive shadow.
So our mission here is to move beyond the sensationalism, right? Beyond the true crime headlines.
Exactly. We need a comprehensive examination of the known facts, the criminal investigation's staggering failures, and the psychological profiles that drove both the victim and the 3 or 4 most viable suspects.
And I think the critical insight we have to hold on to is this. To grasp the crime, you first have to accept that absolutely nothing about William Desmond Taylor was what it seemed.
Nothing was genuine.
That idea, that profound inauthenticity, feels like the perfect place to start. The man that Hollywood knew as William Desmond Taylor was, in reality, a meticulously constructed facade.
He was. So let's go back and look at the 2 really completely separate lives this man led.
Where do we begin?
We begin far from the sunshine of California. We start with his gilded but complicated start. He was born William Cunningham Dean Tanner on April 26, 1872.
And not in America.
No, in County Carlow, Ireland. Born into the Anglo-Irish gentry at a place called Evington House.
That lineage is significant, isn't it? His father was Major Thomas Kearns Dean Tanner, a man of military standing.
It's hugely significant. From birth, William was immersed in a world defined by discipline, by structure, by intense expectation. He was raised with the polish and the bearing of the true aristocracy.
And this is crucial to his later psychological profile, right?
Oh, absolutely. He was privately tutored, taught French and German. He was highly intelligent, keenly observant of social customs. This early immersion in military discipline and the stringent codes of the gentry, it gave him the internal framework he needed for extraordinary self-control.
And critically, for deep, sustained secrecy.
That's the key, the ability to keep secrets.
But the reality of his family's position was starting to fray.
It was. By the 1880s, the family's fortunes were diminishing pretty significantly. They just couldn't keep pace with the continued high expectations and the extravagant lifestyle they were accustomed to.
That gap between what's expected and what's real, That's often a catalyst for huge change, isn't it?
It's the driver. And in 1891, at age 19, William left Ireland for America. He carried with him the indelible stamp of aristocracy and status, but he didn't have the financial means to support it.
His early life in America sounds almost like he was trying on different identities.
It really does. He worked on a dude ranch in Kansas. We know he was a skilled horseman. Then he took odd jobs and eventually joined a traveling theater company.
And that detail, the theater company, that feels like the most telling part. An outlet for performance, for disguise, for living a life that wasn't entirely his own.
You're right. And by the late 1890s, he tried to anchor himself. He established the seemingly conventional, respectable life in New York City. He owned an antique business.
He got married.
In December 1901, he married an actress, Ethel May Hamilton, and they had a daughter, Ethel Daisy, in 1903. On the surface, this was the conventional man building a future.
And then comes the ultimate act of betrayal, the vanishing act.
On October 23, 1908, William Cunningham Dean Tanner walked out of his life.
Just gone.
Gone. Left no note, no explanation, just an empty space. His antique business was failing, debts were piling up. We can only speculate on the depth of the pressure, whether it was financial or personal, but he made a choice to completely erase his past.
I just find that act so profoundly disturbing from a psychological standpoint. I mean, to deliberately shed a wife, a young child, an entire identity aristocratic background, and all because of failure.
Yeah.
And then to have the discipline to maintain that erasure for over a decade.
It's frightening.
It speaks to a level of internal control that is just, yeah, frightening.
It absolutely does. And that 4-year historical gap between 1908 and 1912, that's where the new man was forged. He changed his name to William Desmond Taylor. He prospected in the Yukon in British Columbia, testing his grit, and he continued touring with theater companies.
This whole transition required what? Just immense discipline and secrecy.
Immense. He had the mental fortitude to bury his past life so deep that only someone with exceptional means or, exceptional malice could ever uncover it.
And what better place for a man with a polished but entirely manufactured identity than Hollywood in 1912?
It was the perfect environment. The silent film industry was experimental, it was chaotic, unregulated. Most people arriving there were also reinventing themselves. So a man with Taylor's polish, his authority, his military bearing, and self-possession, he could easily assimilate and rise right to the top.
And his career trajectory was incredibly fast.
Unbelievably fast. He started as an actor in films like The Counterfeiter and Captain Alvarez, but he very quickly transitioned to directing, making his debut in 1914.
And he became hugely successful. I mean, 59 silent films. He directed classics like the first screen adaptations of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, the famous version of Anne of Green Gables.
And he was working with the biggest names in the business, Mary Pickford, Wallace Reed, Mary Miles Minter. He was at the absolute center of the industry.
His professional reputation, ironically, it stood in such sharp contrast to his personal chaos.
It did. He was known for running incredibly orderly, disciplined sets in a completely frenzied industry. He was reliable, professional, and he quickly became an authority figure. He served 3 consecutive terms as president of the Motion Picture Directors Association between 1915 and 1919.
And then comes this detail that just complicates his profile even more. His World War I service.
Yes. In 1918, at the age of 46, he unexpectedly enlists as a private in the Canadian Expeditionary Force.
Which just doesn't fit the profile, right? A successful middle-aged director hiding a past. Why would he join the Army?
Well, it adds a layer of genuine authority and patriotism to his otherwise fabricated persona. He served in Europe, though he never sought combat. He was promoted, and he was discharged in May 1919 with the rank of major.
So he returns to Hollywood, a decorated military veteran, the reserved British gentleman, the highly successful director.
He had manufactured the ultimate portrait of respectable authority.
But the Hollywood he came back to after the war was starting to, rot from the inside out. The very image he'd worked so hard to embody, respectability, discipline, it was shattering across the front pages of newspapers all over the country.
It was an industry facing an existential crisis. It was just a continuous parade of high-profile scandals between 1920 and 1921. The public was horrified, and the moral guardians of the day were demanding action.
And the list of scandals is just staggering. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle facing rape and manslaughter charges, which became this huge national sensation.
Right. Then you have actress Olive Thomas, who died mysteriously with widespread drug rumors swirling around her death.
Wallace Reed, one of the biggest stars, was battling a severe morphine addiction that would eventually kill him in 1923.
Even Jack Pickford was struggling with substance abuse. It was everywhere.
And the fallout was immediate. It was devastating to the studio's bottom line, right?
Oh, completely. Moral reform movements, led by women's clubs and religious organizations, they gained massive traction. There were calls for boycotts, threats of federal censorship laws, government regulation. The major studios, especially Paramount, were terrified of losing control of their product and their profits.
And so, the industry desperately needed a moral savior, a man whose personal image was completely untainted, a man of discipline and authority.
So naturally, they turned to William Desmond Taylor.
Of course.
Yes. Paramount President Adolph Zukor appointed Taylor in late 1921 to spearhead the official campaign to rehabilitate Hollywood's image. He became the designated moral standard bearer, tasked with cleaning up the worst aspects of the industry from the inside.
And he took that role with his typical military seriousness.
He did. He pushed for internal reform, he advocated for morality clauses and contracts for actors and directors, promoted more uplifting films, and critically, he began actively addressing the rampant drug addiction issues among the stars he cared about.
People like Mabel Normand.
Especially Mabel Normand. And this is the moment where Taylor stopped being just a director and became a target.
Right. From a criminological standpoint, this new, highly visible role as a cleanup man immediately put him in extreme danger.
Absolutely. He wasn't just directing movies anymore. He was actively interfering with powerful, dangerous criminal enterprises, specifically the drug distribution networks that were poisoning Hollywood talent.
So he was trying to expose and disrupt a highly profitable and probably very violent underworld.
He was. Anyone who stood to lose profit or freedom or face exposure from his advocacy, and this includes suppliers, dealers, maybe even people inside the studios protecting them, they all had the most compelling motive to silence him. Permanently.
Taylor had inadvertently walked into a war zone wearing a moral spotlight.
He really had.
This danger context, it brings us to this volatile mix of secrets and personal relationships that defined his final year. He was juggling high-profile affairs, professional mentorships, and existential threats all at the same time.
It was a tangled web.
So let's start with Mabel Normand, who is maybe his most emotionally intimate relationship.
Mabel Normand was a superstar. She was an icon of silent comedy, had worked with Chaplin, with Arbuckle. But by 1920, she was spiraling.
It was the dryness.
Yes, a severe cocaine addiction that was actively destroying her career and her mental health.
And Taylor acted as her stabilizer, her mentor, maybe her lover. We know he was deeply in love with her. He carried her locket, right? With his photograph inside.
He did. He was this paternal, stabilizing presence who was urging her into treatment. He was possibly saving her life, especially after all of Thomas's mysterious overdose death.
The dynamic sounds incredibly complex.
It was. It was romantically charged, but it was also deeply rooted in Taylor's reform efforts. He was trying to save her from the very drug dealers he was publicly fighting.
Which placed her, and by extension him, directly in the crosshairs of those criminal elements.
Exactly. If Taylor was getting too close to her suppliers, silencing him was a way to keep their cash cow addicted and quiet.
Okay, so now we pivot to the source of the greatest emotional volatility in his life. Mary Miles Minter.
Ah, yes. A beautiful 19-year-old, one of the highest paid actresses in Hollywood. Taylor had directed her in the smash hit Anne of Green Gables.
And Minter's infatuation with the 49-year-old Taylor was, what's the word?
Consuming, obsessive, and critically, it was unrequited.
He wasn't interested.
He maintained the relationship was strictly professional. He saw her as a protege. But Mary Miles Minter, she saw him as her destiny.
And the evidence of this obsession, the love letters they found after his death, they're both heartbreaking and chilling.
They really are. They were written in this intensely obsessive, almost childish style, just proclaiming, "Dearest, I love you, I love you, I love you," over and over. Some were even written in a simple code.
Which suggests this desperate need to communicate secrets or to establish an intimacy that just wasn't there.
It does. And from a psychological perspective, Minter represents extreme vulnerability. She was groomed since childhood to be a commodity. She was financially dependent on her mother, and she was emotionally underdeveloped.
So she lacked the capacity to process adult rejection in a healthy way.
Exactly. Leading to what we would clinically recognize as dangerous attachment patterns and severe emotional volatility. A sudden, cold rejection from Taylor could easily have triggered a violent, unmeditated outburst.
And the puppet master behind Mary was her mother, Charlotte Shelby. Classic, domineering, ambitious stage mother.
Shelby was absolute control personified. She managed Mary's life, her career, her finances, reportedly confiscating the vast majority of Mary's substantial earnings.
And that financial control kept Mary immature and dependent, right? It kept Shelby in the driver's seat.
Always. Which made the conflict with Taylor inevitable. Shelby viewed him with intense hostility because he was a direct existential threat to her power base.
If Mary married Taylor, or even pursued a serious relationship with him,
Shelby would lose her golden goose. Her financial security, her identity as the controlling matriarch, it would all be destroyed.
so that creates a very unique psychological motive.
It does. Shelby's entire identity was completely intertwined with controlling her daughter. The loss of that control and the massive income stream that came with it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat.
And that kind of intensity hatred, combined with financial desperation, that's a powerful driver for premeditated murder.
A very powerful driver.
But the threat of an angry mother or a rejected girl, it almost pales in comparison to the pure criminal danger posed by Edward Sands, the blackmailing shadow.
Edward Sands, born Edward Fitzgerald Snyder in 1894, was a career criminal, fraud, embezzlement, a military deserter. He worked for Taylor as his valet, his secretary, and cook, starting in 1920.
And he had this strange presentation, right?
Very strange. A slight build, an affected Cockney accent, and was described as having an effeminate voice.
And this position gave Sands intimate access to Taylor's entire life.
It did. And while Taylor was in Europe in mid-1921, Sands systematically betrayed him. He stole over $5,000, he wrecked Taylor's car, forged checks. Taylor fired him, but the betrayal was far from over.
This is where the real danger starts.
It is. On December 27, 1921, Taylor received pawn tickets in the mail for the jewelry Sands had stolen, and they were signed using Taylor's real name, William Cunningham Dean Tanner.
Wow.
And the note that came with them was a taunt, alias Jimmy V. Sands knew the secret. The abandoned wife, the child, the aristocratic past. This was the single most explosive secret Taylor kept, and Sands was holding the detonator.
That taunt wasn't just blackmail, it was psychological warfare. He was announcing that he had the power to destroy Taylor's entire carefully constructed Hollywood identity.
And Taylor took this threat seriously. He reportedly told friends that if he ever saw Sands again, he would kill him.
And Sands just kept tormenting him.
He did. He later broke into the bungalow, leaving these tangible reminders of his access. Footprints on Taylor's bed and the butt of a distinctive Russian gold-tipped cigarette smoked on the porch. Sands had moved beyond simple theft. He was performing an act of psychological dominance, turning his former employer into his victim.
So we have this volatile, dangerous environment Taylor was living in. He's fighting drug dealers, rejecting an obsessive star, infuriating a controlling mother, and being tormented by a blackmailing criminal who knows his deepest secret.
It's an impossible situation.
And this all comes to a head on the cold evening of Wednesday, February 1st, 1922. Let's try to reconstruct those final deadly hours.
Taylor and Mabel Norman spent the evening together. It was Prohibition, but they were drinking orange blossom cocktails made with gin, and they were discussing, highbrow topics, philosophy, Nietzsche, Freud, along with movies.
And the timeline is extremely tight, and it's documented by witnesses.
Very tight. Taylor returned a call to actor Antonio Moreno at 7:00 p.m. Norman arrived at 7:05 p.m. Their time together lasted about 40 minutes.
There's also this strange sidebar involving Henry Peavy, the valet who would discover the body.
Yes. Taylor had mentioned to Norman that he had bailed Peavy out that very morning. He'd been arrested for social vagrancy and being lewd and dissolute.
Which were common euphemisms used to criminalize homosexual activity at the time.
They were, and this detail is important because it further illustrates Taylor's double life. Taylor, the moral standard bearer fighting for Hollywood's image, was also intimately involved in the legal trouble of a man arrested for activity the moral reformers were trying to stamp out. It was another secret.
So at 7:45 p.m., Norman gets ready to leave.
Taylor walks her to her chauffeur-driven car, stands on the porch, waves, and blows kisses as she pulls away. She is the last person to see him alive, aside from the person who killed him.
And the shot happened almost immediately after she left. Probably around 7:50 p.m.
That timing is corroborated by a key witness, Faith Cole McLean, the wife of actor Douglas McLean, who lived nearby.
And what did she report?
She reported hearing a sound she initially dismissed as a car backfiring, the loud, definitive crack of a .38 caliber pistol. She heard this around 8:00 p.m.
And she did what any neighbor would do. She looked out her window to see what caused the noise.
She did, and she saw the figure emerge. This is the pivotal witness account that the investigation and the press later just struggled to reconcile.
What did she see?
McLean saw a person quickly emerge from Taylor's bungalow, walk down the steps, turn left, and dart through the alleyway toward the street.
And her description of this person was incredibly specific.
Incredibly. And years later, shocking. The person looked like a man wearing a long coat, a muffler or high collar obscuring their face, and a plaid cap pulled low. But the build was specifically described as slight, and the walk was unusual, almost effeminate.
So the immediate assumption by police was that the killer was a man, probably a thief, or maybe Edward Sands.
Right. But that detail, the slight build and unusual walk, it just did not match Sands' profile. And it was later seen as powerful evidence pointing toward a woman, specifically Mary Miles Minter or Charlotte Shelby, who were both short and slight.
Okay, let's turn to the ballistics. The wound itself.
Taylor was shot once. The bullet entered low on the left side of his back, traveled through his lung, and lodged near his neck.
And the weapon was a .38 caliber pistol fired at close range. We know that from the powder burns found on his clothing.
We do. And the angle of that wound is the key piece of criminological analysis here. The trajectory strongly suggested the shooter was short, around 5 feet tall, or was crouching significantly.
Oh, but even more telling.
Even more telling, the angle of the wound indicated Taylor's left arm was raised, as if in an embrace or greeting.
So just think about that moment. He's just walked Mabel Norman to her car. He goes back to his porch, and before he can even turn and go inside, he's shot.
And that angle suggests he was facing his killer, raising his arm, maybe to welcome them, or maybe to ward off a sudden attack from someone he thought he knew.
It feels like a crime of intimacy, not a random attack.
Exactly. And the physical crime scene details also confirm this. There was no forced entry, which indicates the killer was either let in or was someone Taylor had just been with. No signs of a struggle, no weapon found.
And the massive pool of blood confirmed he'd been lying there, dead, for hours.
It did. And while police initially ruled out simple robbery, Taylor still had $78 in cash, a diamond ring, and a gold watch on him. There was a discrepancy.
The missing cash.
A large sum of cash that Taylor had shown his accountant the day before was confirmed missing. So the killer didn't take personal valuables, but they did take a specific large sum of money, a detail that would later become crucial when analyzing the drug hitman theory.
The scene was already compromised by the time the body was discovered. But the actions taken immediately after the discovery, they cemented the fact that this case was going to be an institutional disaster.
It was a perfect storm of contamination, cover-up, and outright studio manipulation. It started with the arrival of a mysterious man claiming to be a doctor.
The vanishing doctor.
Right. He pushes through the gathering crowd, declares that Taylor died of a stomach hemorrhage, and then completely vanishes forever.
And that false assessment, a natural death. That was critical, right? It allowed the scene to remain unsecured for a vital period of time.
It did, and the studios immediately rushed into that vacuum. Charles Ayton, the general manager of famous Players Lasky, which later became Paramount, he arrived before the coroner and the police had properly secured the perimeter.
And his mission was explicit. Damage control.
100%. He instantly began removing anything that could fuel another scandal like the Arbuckle case. This included scandalous items like the obsessive love letters from Mary Miles Minter, bottles of bootleg liquor.
Right, it was prohibition.
And catastrophically, he instructed Henry Peavy to clean up the pool of blood in the living room.
So within hours of the discovery, you have a vanishing doctor, bootleg gin being spirited away, and the general manager of Paramount literally ordering the cleanup of the primary evidence.
It sounds less like a criminal investigation and more like a rushed stage production.
And the police just played right into their hands.
They did. A detective named Ziegler made the catastrophic error of accepting the initial natural death assessment. He didn't object to Ayton's actions, and he effectively ceded control of the crime scene to the studio.
So the murder was only confirmed when the actual coroner finally rolled the body over and found the bullet hole in Taylor's back.
By which point, the crime scene was hopelessly compromised. Neighbors had tracked through, the blood was gone, letters had been removed. The integrity of the scene was non-existent.
And the LAPD was just fundamentally ill-equipped for a case like this.
Completely. In 1922, they had no forensic experts, no standardized crime scene protocols. They were overwhelmed by the pressure and the celebrity circus.
So this institutional weakness meant that the vital evidence they did find, things like Minter's letters, the handkerchiefs embroidered MMM, the rumored pink nightgown, the documents revealing Taylor's real name,
All of it was mishandled, poorly documented, and slowly vanished over the years.
And compounding that incompetence was the element of outright political corruption, which in 1922 Los Angeles was just rampant.
It was. The environment in LA County law enforcement was toxic. It wasn't just low-level graft. The corruption went right to the top. Multiple district attorneys in the county, Thomas Lee Woolwine, Asa Keys, Burr Fitz, were later convicted or indicted for bribery and other felonies in separate cases.
This context is so important, sets a clear precedent. In LA in the 1920s, money and political influence could absolutely buy silence and obstruction of justice.
And that brings us to the financial trail surrounding one of our prime suspects, Charlotte Shelby. Her family finances, which were investigated years later, revealed highly suspicious activity. There was a staggering $750,000 million in modern currency that Shelby never declared to the IRS.
And the timing of this is crucial.
It is. Significant transfers of this undeclared money into untraceable negotiable bonds and stock certificates began precisely in 1922, the year of the murder.
Which strongly suggests the flow of payoffs or bribes designed to obstruct the investigation, particularly concerning the Shelby family.
When you combine the catastrophic crime scene contamination by the studio, the structural incompetence of the LAPD, and the powerful evidence of systemic political corruption, you create a perfect shield.
A shield for the powerful.
For the powerful, the wealthy, and the politically connected, which included the Shelby family and Paramount Studios, they were protected, and the pursuit of justice was effectively shut down before it even began.
Given the corruption and the lost evidence, we really have to rely heavily on psychological profiles and circumstantial links.
We do.
So let's focus on the two women who are constantly around Taylor, starting with Mary Miles Minter, the rejected lover.
Minter's profile is defined by emotional instability and obsessive attachment. The evidence is clear. The obsessive love letters, her unsubstantiated claims of an engagement, her dramatic public breakdown at the morgue.
Right, where she offered her blood for a transfusion and claimed the corpse spoke to her.
All of this points toward a person in the throes of an unmeditated crime of passion, likely following some kind of extreme rejection.
And the physical evidence against her is much more compelling than just emotional volatility.
It is. Her height, just over 5 feet tall, perfectly matches the trajectory analysis that suggested the shooter was short or crouching. Furthermore, we know she had access to a .38 caliber pistol, having used one in a prior suicide attempt.
But the most damning piece of physical evidence, it came years later, didn't it?
It did, in 1937, though it was largely discounted at the time. An unfired, soft-nosed lead bullet, the exact same type and weight as the fatal bullet, was discovered secreted away in the rafters of the Shelby family home.
Which provides a direct physical link between the family and the specific weapon used.
It does. And Minter herself confirmed her proximity to the crime. In her unpublished autobiography, years later, she admitted that she and her mother were both at Taylor's bungalow the night of the killing.
Which directly contradicts all the initial police statements she'd made.
All of them. This admission strongly suggests involvement in the immediate cover-up, regardless of who pulled the trigger. Minter's psychological motivation was rooted in volatile passion, rejection, and this deep-seated inability to handle boundaries.
Now, if Minter was the volatile flame, Charlotte Shelby was the immovable, controlling wall. Her psychological motivation was purely protection and control.
Shelby's personality profile is one of dominance and intense manipulation. Her hatred of Taylor wasn't romantic, it was financial and proprietary. Multiple witnesses claim she openly threatened Taylor. Mary Miles Minter herself once said her mother was always going to kill somebody.
And her initial statements to the police were, obviously filled with lies.
In the words of the investigators themselves, and the evidence related to the weapon, it overwhelmingly points toward Shelby.
She not only owned a .38 caliber pistol,
but critically, she owned rare and unusual ammunition that matched the fatal bullet type used to kill Taylor. This wasn't standard, easily traceable ammunition.
and her actions after the murder just screamed guilt.
They do. She acted decisively to destroy the evidence. She threw her gun into a Louisiana bayou in August 1922, 7 months after the murder. While the weapon was later retrieved, it was too degraded by the water for conclusive ballistics testing.
The deliberate destruction of the potential murder weapon is maybe the most powerful circumstantial evidence in the entire case.
It is. So Shelby's motive wasn't passion, it was existential protection, preserving her financial control over her daughter, combined with the intensity of her personal hatred for Taylor's influence. She had the means, the specific ammunition, the motive, and the financial capacity to ensure the investigation went nowhere.
For many criminologists, she's still the most likely candidate.
The most likely candidate for the murder, or at the very least, its orchestrator.
Okay, so moving away from that volatile mother-daughter dynamic, let's consider Edward Sands, the vengeful blackmailer. He had the clearest criminal motive.
He had a profound motive, revenge for being fired and exposed as a thief, compounded by the immense power he held with Taylor's secret identity. And Taylor had threatened to kill him.
He had also proven he knew the layout and routine of the bungalow, having broken in before.
He had, but the most compelling piece of evidence pointing away from Sands is his method of escape. He quit his job in Northern California immediately after hearing the news and completely vanished. Never found, never questioned.
It's a classic criminal disappearance.
It is, yet the contradictions are significant. Faith McLean's description of the killer was a slight figure with an effeminate walk, which didn't accurately match Sands' documented build.
And more critically,
the crime scene just didn't match his profile as a career thief. Why kill Taylor and not take the readily available valuables, the ring, the watch, if the motive was standard robbery? The missing item was a large sum of cash, which suggests a targeted transaction or payment, not opportunistic theft.
there was also that strange, persistent rumor connecting Sands to Taylor's past. The theory that Sands was actually Taylor's younger brother, Dennis Dean Tammer, who also disappeared in 1912.
That theory was eventually discounted due to documented age discrepancies in birth records, but the fact that it even existed highlights the sheer complexity and layers of secrecy surrounding Taylor's origins. It shows how every person connected to him seemed to have their own fabricated identity or hidden past.
We also have to address Henry Peavy, the man who found the body. His involvement remains circumstantial, but the timing is suspicious.
It is circumstantial. Peavy discovered the body, and he had been bailed out by Taylor just 3 days prior from that arrest. The relationship was unusual, and his behavior was noted as odd-like, wearing flashy golf costumes despite owning no clubs.
But he was cleared by the police.
He was. But the timing of Taylor's involvement with him just before the murder remains a strange coincidence. And let's not forget the horrific attempts by Hollywood correspondent Floribel Muir to secure a confession from him.
That utterly unethical and desperate stunt.
Exactly. Muir privately suspected Peavy and attempted a bizarre confession stunt using a ghost costume in a cemetery, which of course failed completely. It was a clear example of the sensationalist and, frankly, racist media environment of the era.
Finally, let's look at the broader alternative theories that rely on Taylor's dangerous new mission. The drug hitman theory remains highly plausible.
It does. The theory, strongly advanced by researcher Robert Giroux, fits the facts extremely well, given Taylor's role as Hollywood's anti-drug cleanup man.
He was actively preparing to testify against Mabel Norman's drug suppliers,
Which would have been an imminent mortal threat to a violent criminal organization. A contract killing designed to permanently silence the reformer is perfectly logical.
and this theory perfectly explains the missing cash. If that money was payment to the assassin, then the killer wouldn't take the personal valuables because the job wasn't robbery, it was assassination.
It accounts for the sudden, professional nature of the single shot to the back, potentially fired during a greeting. A hired killer would ensure quick silence and make the death look like a possible street robbery gone wrong, only taking the prearranged fee.
We also have theories centered on Taylor's own sexuality and hidden life, given his alleged 8-year relationship with George James Hopkins.
In 1922, homosexual activity was criminalized. Exposure would have been ruinous for Taylor, the moral figurehead. This raises the possibility that a blackmailer or a jealous or regented lover within that hidden world chose to eliminate him to prevent disclosure. The constant fear of exposure was a daily reality for him.
And we have to acknowledge Margaret Gibson, the actress connected to opium dealing who worked with Taylor. She confessed to the murder shortly before her death in 1964.
This confession is a classic true crime footnote. Without supporting evidence or detail, it's impossible to verify. Given the number of false confessions the case generated over the years, it remains inconclusive, though it certainly ties back to the pervasive drug element Taylor was fighting.
When you look at this whole constellation of suspects, the rejected lover, the controlling mother, the vengeful blackmailer, the drug hitman, all with compelling motives, the question isn't who might have done it, but why did the state fail so completely to prosecute anyone?
And the answer is a grim criminological postmortem. It's a catastrophic chain of institutional and human failures. It reveals layer after layer of institutional rot that made the case fundamentally unsolvable from the moment the body was discovered.
Failure number 1, crime scene contamination.
Catastrophic, immediate contamination. The mysterious doctor's false declaration allowed time for the studios to intervene. Charles Ayton and his team physically removed evidence, cleaned up the blood, and allowed neighbors to track through the scene. The integrity of the physical evidence was compromised within hours.
Failure number 2, LAPD incompetence.
The department was organizationally incapable of handling a crime of this magnitude. They lacked the necessary protocols, had no forensic experts, and failed to properly document and collect what evidence remained. This led to the permanent loss of most original files and physical evidence over the years.
Failure number 3, systemic political corruption.
The evidence of political corruption in LA County, demonstrated by the later indictments of multiple district attorneys, ensured that wealth and power could obstruct justice. The suspicious flow of hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Shelby family starting in 1922 points directly to payoffs designed to neutralize the investigation.
And failure number 4, studio pressure.
Paramount's immense power and determination to control the narrative was a massive, paralyzing force. The studios prioritized protecting Hollywood's image and their business interests over the pursuit of justice for William Desmond Taylor. They actively suppressed the scandal.
And the final nail in the coffin is what you call the power of suspect plurality.
Exactly. With so many viable, motive-rich suspects, Shelby, Minter, Sands, drug dealers, the lack of definitive, untainted physical evidence meant that proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt against any one of them became virtually impossible. They couldn't prove who did it when 3 or 4 people had compelling reasons and were all actively participating in the destruction or suppression of evidence.
The failure to solve Taylor's murder didn't just become a cold case. It acted as the immediate, definitive catalyst for the moral cleansing of Hollywood. This murder changed the industry forever.
Oh, completely. Coming right after the Arbuckle scandal, Taylor's murder provided the critical, undeniable ammunition that moral reformers needed. The industry realized it had to police itself or the government would impose severe censorship. Which
led directly to the creation of the Hays Office in 1922.
It did. The Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America hired former Postmaster General Will H. Hays to clean up their image.
And the Hays Office quickly implemented morality clauses and strict guidelines that evolved over the next decade into the stringent production code.
For decades, Hollywood films were tightly governed by these rules, controlling everything from wardrobe to dialogue to plot outcomes. This system of rigid censorship, which dominated American cinema for 50 years, directly traces its lineage back to the fear and public disgust generated by the Taylor scandal.
But the personal cost was immediate and tragic. Mabel Normand's reputation never recovered from being linked to the murder and the drug rumors. Her career declined.
Yep.
She died young in 1930.
And Mary Miles Minter's career was completely destroyed. By age 23, she was deemed toxic. The revelations about her disturbing obsession and her mother's suspected involvement made her unemployable. She retired completely from acting and faded into obscurity.
And yet, the murder gained this cultural immortality. It became a permanent fixture of Hollywood lore. The 1950 film Sunset Boulevard, which brilliantly critiques Hollywood's dark side, deliberately named its lead character Norma Desmond, a fusion of Mabel Normand and William Desmond Taylor.
It continues to inspire books, films, endless speculation. Even directors like King Vidor conducted their own private investigations. The mystery is so compelling because it is so deeply tied to the secrets and lies that Hollywood was founded on. The case officially remains open.
Okay, let's try one final synthesis of what we know. A respected, yet secretly troubled director was shot once in the back at close range, likely by someone he knew, during a moment of greeting.
And we have the fiercely protective mother, Charlotte Shelby, with the means, the specialized ammunition, and the profound financial motive.
We have the obsessive, rejected star, Mary Miles Minter, who was physically present that night.
We have the vengeful, blackmailing criminal, Edward Sands, who knew the biggest secret and vanished immediately.
And we have the plausible, cold theory of a professional drug hitman silencing a dangerous reformer.
The murder of William Desmond Taylor was not just a tragedy for the man, it was a surgical exposure of early Hollywood's fragile moral foundation and the rampant corruption endemic in the local government. The relentless pressure from the powerful studio system ensured that business interests and reputation control superseded the pursuit of actual justice.
We understand the man who died, William Desmond Taylor, the master of reinvention, the disciplined architect of secrets. But the psychological profile of the person who pulled that trigger, it remains permanently obscured, hidden beneath layers of suspicious money, institutional lies, and corrupted power structures.
So what deeper truths about the human drive for ultimate control, like Charlotte Shelby's desperation, or the desire for ultimate revenge, like Edward Sands' malice, were permanently buried alongside the evidence in that chaotic Los Angeles morning? The truth about Hollywood's first great crime remains, fittingly, its most dramatic and impenetrable secret.